doing something. James was preparing to stay there before Sally Hemings even came to France. Hiring a tutor, at the end of his apprenticeship, he hires a tutor for almost 2 years. That's 2 years worth of money and time and effort to come back to stay in Virginia. I don't think so. It looks like he was preparing. I'm not going to be sexist about this, but it strikes me as odd that a 16-year-old, that she by herself was the only one who thought, I'm going to stay here. This was her brother and herself planning to do this. But Jefferson persuades them to come home. They come home. He immediately accepts George Washington's offer to become Secretary of State. He said he couldn't turn that down. So I talk about what happens after that. James Hemings goes with him to New York when they're there, and then Philadelphia. And his life, he continues to be paid a salary. The thing that I neglected to mention is that while he's in Paris, while they're in Paris, both James and Sally Hemings receive wages from Jefferson, just like the other servants of Jefferson. And I mentioned this before, but that James Hemings and Sally get wages, and I'd sort of over the years looked at their wages and sort of compared them to the wages Jefferson was paying other of his servants, and thinking, you're shortchanging these people, right? The coachman is getting this much money, and this person is getting that much more money, and James and Sally Hemings are getting a piddling amount. And then it was like, the sort of duh moment. Wait a minute, it's not. Don't look vertically. Don't look at what they're getting in relationship to the other people. Look horizontally. What are chefs getting in Paris? And it turns out that James Hemings was being paid much more than the typical chef in an upper-class household, as was Sally Hemings as well. So it's wrong to think of them, too, when I mention the black community there as a source of support. These people are getting paid, and they're getting paid well. And they're getting paid every month, unlike most French servants who were paid once a year. You signed a contract and you got paid at the end of the year. And sometimes people didn't pay, and they would have to fight over their severance, but this is one of the reasons they had a revolution. Sometimes the masters would not pay the servants, and what are you going to do? Go to another place? They would be forced to re-sign and continue on, hoping eventually that they would be paid. So these are people who had an opportunity. James Hemings had had an opportunity to know that he could work for a living and take care of himself, and Sally Hemings had learned that too, to a certain extent. So when we come back to America, Jefferson continues to pay James Hemings like a white worker when he's in New York and when he is in Philadelphia, up until the point at which Jefferson decides that he's going to leave after getting sort of beat up by Hamilton. He's going to leave the cabinet, and James Hemings and he come to an agreement in which James Hemings agrees. Jefferson says, I will give you your freedom if you train another person to become a chef. So we end up with James Hemings and Jefferson, coming to this agreement. He comes back to Monticello and fulfills the promise, and then is freed. And the rest of the story, James is a character that is a person that his character attracts so many different people because of his character. He's this very, very volatile person, evidently a very talented person. And he's someone whom people who've read The Galley, people who I've talked to about him, respond to very, very well. And I think it fits very well with my goal of sort of showing a slave as an individual. You see James Hemings first as a young boy capturing mockingbirds for Jefferson, and then as a young man who is in Richmond when Jefferson calls him to go to Paris, working on his own, and then a person who goes off and becomes a professional, and then comes back to America, and after his freedom embarks upon a peripatetic life of travel, and then his life ends tragically. There's an arc in a way that you don't get to see, as I said, with most enslaved people, seeing him also in connection to his family. So On the Mountain is just a story about, sort of brings the family back here, talks about different members of the family and how they're relating to one another at this point, talks about Sally Hemings and her children, and Jefferson's relations with his children. One of the things that struck me in doing this, I remembered when I was working on my first book, I went out to Poplar Forest, and someone gave me some letters that Jefferson had written to his overseer, Joel Yancey, there, that I didn't quite use. I didn't use in the first book, but in this book I used very well to, I think, to show very well that Jefferson was around Beverly, Madison, and Eston Hemings. They traveled with him to Poplar Forest. He doesn't mention them by name, but he says Johnny Hemings and his two aides will come with me, and we will go to Poplar Forest and we'll stay. So this notion that they are disconnected is not really true. And so that is talked about in the story as well. And finally, the final cataclysm at Monticello, when Jefferson dies in debt, and I'm sure you all know, greatly in debt, and loses everything, and the slaves even lose even more. Many of them lose their families in the auction that takes place at this time. And following the Hemingses to the ones who are freed, who move into Charlottesville, Madison and Eston and Sally Hemings, Peter Hemings, all of these people end up sort of informally freed in some way. I mean, Sally Hemings ends up informally freed. Madison and Eston are freed formally. Two of their children had run away, Beverly and Harriet, earlier to live as white people and have sort of disappeared off the radar screen. That's something I would like to sort of work on for the next volume. There'll be another kind of detective story to try to ferret out. And so to end with this, sort of arc of this 4 generations of family in a way that ends in a tragic situation. There's nothing about slavery that was a picnic for anyone, as I said, but this is a story that I think illuminates that in a very, very, I hope, poignant sort of way. And we wouldn't have it if we did not have Jefferson's records, the memories of some members of the Hemings family, the recollections of Madison Hemings, the oral history of the Hemings family that people here at Monticello have been gathering. I've benefited enormously from the work of Diane Swanwright and Cinder Stanton in getting word and putting me in touch with people, and Beverly Gray, people who know about this, who know about the Hemingses afterwards, to sort of piece all of this together. And it's been, I should say, I'm glad I did it. I mean, I really came so close to just going on to Jefferson, and which Peter Onuf, who's a professor here at the University of Virginia, has been after me. You've got to do the Jefferson biography. You've got to do that. You've got to do that. And I'm so glad that I decided to postpone that and go this route, because I really think it's a great time to be talking about this. It's a great time to sort of reinvestigate America's roots and the world that formed us in a way. And I really do think that there's much to tell us about where we are today by looking at this family. And so, at this point, I'd like to entertain any questions you have about the book, about, the methodology, or, how anything that I've said today that would be of interest to you.